Good morning, Dawn.
Good morning, Jen, and good morning, everybody. We're pretty excited to be here this morning with you all, or the evening, wherever you are, to talk about enterprise integration with automations. That's a key part of FME Server. So lots of fun. We have some great demos, and yeah, there's us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that photo is a little bit old now, but
There's right. There's no chance that you're going to get us confused if you meet us in person. Jen has great hair and I don't have any, so there you go.
yeah, so I guess we should introduce ourselves a little bit in case people don't know who we are.
Yeah.
So I've been at Safe for a little while now. I've been an FME server expert for around 3.5 years before transitioning in the spring to take on support for our FME Cloud product, which is just a hosted version of FME Server in AWS. So if you ever use our FME Cloud or you're deploying FME Server with things like Docker or Kubernetes, when you come into support, you'll probably be speaking to me.
Awesome. Yeah, and I've been at Safe since the beginning. I'm one of the co-founders, and I spend a lot of my time talking about and thinking about things about server and enterprise, and of course, XML.
Dawn, are you going to tell us what we're talking about today?
And we'll talk about enterprise applications and integration and what are these enterprise integration patterns and why are we so excited about them. And then we're going to talk about the FME platform, and then we're going to give 4 demos showing FME automations in action.
Yeah, so what would you say is an enterprise application for people who maybe don't know what we're talking about today?
Yeah, so enterprise applications are applications that are installed, at the enterprise. So Safe has many. We have Salesforce, we have Slack. And the one thing that everybody expects of their enterprise applications today is that we expect that the applications all communicate and they work together. Users don't want to have to be moving from application to application. They expect if they do something in one application, it's automatically, the information that's necessary is moved to another application. So they don't want the applications to work in isolation. They want them to work collectively.
So this is when you're bringing all of these different enterprise applications together, and you'll probably be sharing different services, functions, and data between them to allow you to achieve, I guess, what your business operations and processes need. So we have a lot of customer stories actually online on our website where we have people doing this. So one of them is actually pretty local to us. So we have the city of Coquitlam. They have a few different enterprise applications, so things like Maximo, Tempest, and they also have a third-party vendor for things like recycling bins. But they needed to come up with a system that made it easy to integrate all 3 of those together. So they're using enterprise integration to do that.
Yeah, so basically within an organization, the idea of connecting all your data, all your applications, your services, and your devices together so that information can flow freely, basically to get more value from your IT investments. Nobody as a user wants to have to go to one application, do one thing, then this other system also needs the same information, so I'm going to rekey it in over here. That just drives people crazy, and there's lots of errors that are made. People aren't great at doing the same thing multiple times, and so why have your most expensive and valuable resource doing that? Why not use enterprise integration to remove it and make the workflows much smoother? Yeah.
And I guess the one thing you didn't mention as well is that the time savings as well. If you start to integrate these different enterprise applications together, like the customers that we see doing it, like the time savings that they have is so big compared to everyone manually going and extracting all of this data. So what are enterprise integration patterns? So a pattern by definition is just the regular way in which something happens or is done. So if we apply this to enterprise integrations, we can start to look and see if there are regular ways that different enterprise integrations are done across different organizations and in different industries. So we've been reading this book, Enterprise Integration Patterns. So what this is doing is the authors of this book noticed that integrating enterprise applications wasn't easy. And this was exacerbated by a lack of common language between the different departments and people that were trying to integrate these enterprise applications. So what they did was they came up with 65 patterns that they noticed were repeatable solutions, and they made sure to use technology independent vocabulary. And their book and their website has a lot of diagrams in to make it easier to document these different integration solutions. So what they've done here is sort of create a sort of cookbook approach to enterprise integration. So it covers common themes that people will experience and need to do when they're integrating enterprise applications. So it's not like a step-by-step recipe book on how to integrate every different enterprise application or system out there, because that would be impossible. So they've just identified them as different patterns that people can apply in their workflows.
Yeah, yeah. So if I was an IT expert and I'm integrating a bunch of systems together, what I do now is I come in and I look for these common patterns that I'm aware of, and then with FME, you can solve each of these portions of the problem with different patterns, and then by linking the patterns together, you can come up with a repeatable solution. And the thing is there's these patterns that happen over and over again from organization to organization, and these are something that's used in software, in software architecture, just building programs. This whole idea of finding patterns really can help you build repeatable solutions. In FME, you're not going to see, hey, there's the splitter pattern, there's a process manager pattern, there's a content richer pattern. What you're going to see is these ability to easily build these patterns. And then so what Jen and others at SAFE are doing is showing examples of each of these patterns. So then you could take that pattern and use it in your own solution. So yeah, so this is one of the more common ones. This is called a splitter pattern, and we're going to show this in action later. And the idea is you have a message coming across, and that's how all these different systems communicate, is with these things called messages. And in FME, under the covers, we're slinging JSON around, so the messages are JSON. And JSON is, the common language of the web and also of web services, and so it's very easy to get to sling JSON back and forth. And so in this first pattern we're showing here is called the splitter pattern. You have a message coming in, but it's got multiple components in it, and you want to split it up into small individual messages, and that's really easy to do. It's called the splitter pattern. And the nice thing is the splitter pattern is all those order items, so all those component pieces that are split up can be done in parallel. And so yeah, and we're going to show you how to do that. Yeah, so how are they used? Again, when organizations have a set of applications, what they do is they come in, and now you can identify the problem, break it down into a set of patterns that need to be solved, implement those, and then to use them to solve your integration challenge. So what the first step is, you go and kind of, like harvest patterns. Here's the content richer pattern here. Here's the splitter pattern there. Here's the process manager pattern here. And then now that you've broken it down into these patterns and you know how to solve each small little pattern, it allows you to decompose the larger problem, which might seem, impossible to solve, into smaller and smaller little patterns that you can solve for solving bigger problems. Yeah, and so for enterprise integration, it's different than Workbench. In Workbench, we're slinging rows around, we're slinging the raw data. Here, which going on between each of the components in the automations, you're going to see are these messages, and the messages are JSON, and we can connect to things like JSON or JMS. Internally, we have a high performance JSON architecture. We allowed you to use no code, and so the big difference with FME automations is that you do not have to write any code. So you'll see us build these patterns today, and we're not going to open up any code editor. There is no code to write. It's all done in a visual environment. So, and it is the only one that was been built from the ground up to be no code. Other tools are striving to be no code, or they call about low code, whereas FME is a no code solution. Yeah, safe software. So we've been doing this for 25 years, working on enabling people to get more value from data. About 10,000 plus organizations use FME technology to solve problems in many, many industries. We have a partner network around the world that gives face-to-face or consulting services or value-added resellers or integration services. And 128 countries been localized in English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Japanese, and others. Yeah. So our mission is always been to help users, help you maximize the value of data and applications. And so automations really focuses on enabling you to maximize the value of connecting your applications together. For years, we've been working on enabling you to get whatever data you're working with to the applications and transform data from one data type to another data type. And now with automations, we're really taking it to the next level and enabling you to take the amazing power we have of the data engine and connecting that to the applications, connecting technology of automations to give you a full enterprise solution.
So the FME integration platform, there's two main products really here. So everybody needs to start with FME Desktop. So this is where you will sort of author your workflows that are going to be doing the integration and including some of the patterns in there. So as Don mentioned, it's a no-code interface. You can add all of your connectors in there, transform your data so that you get the output that you need. And then once you're ready to start automating those workflows, you want to take it off your desktop and publish it to FME Server or FME Cloud, which is our hosted version of FME Server in AWS. So you don't have to worry about deploying it, managing the hardware infrastructure with FME Cloud. We do that all for you. So this is where you start to really leverage all of the different automation capabilities and make your workflows, take them away from being a manual thing that you'll run every time someone maybe requests an integration to getting them to just run without you and do that quickly. Yeah, and spatial data, FME sort of grew up processing spatial data in the beginning, and I think in a slide or two, Don's going to show all the different formats that we do support. But FME came from a spatial background, so we do support spatial data better than any other enterprise integration tool. And we are seeing that spatial data is becoming critical for the enterprise. So I think spatial data historically might have been considered something that maybe has a higher barrier to entry. So advanced software was needed, probably specialized people, and the data would have been really large, which meant it was difficult to process, store it, and move it around. So companies weren't using it to their full potential. So a lot of the technology advancements that we're seeing, like especially with cloud computing, have lowered that barrier. And we're seeing some really big players that were traditionally in the non-spatial arena start to add spatial support as they're realizing that it's a critical market for them. So these are people like Snowflake, Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery, and we do support all of those in FME as well. We're also seeing as well that spatial data, it's easier than ever to access spatial data and also create spatial data. So there's more and more satellites going up, more and more open data portals that you can download all this data. And even things like your smartphone, which is, most people have a smartphone in their pocket, which has location data turned on. So you're sending that back to a lot of different applications on your phone, giving people spatial data to work with and sort of learn more about who's using their services. So then with FME, you can connect all of these different data types, applications, and services together. So inside FME Desktop, traditionally, people have always started with readers and writers, which will connect to different data sources which you have on your computer. But more and more, we're adding these connector transformers. So transformers are like the building blocks to a data transformation. So these are the little blue blocks that you'll see inside any of our Workspace screenshots. And each of these has a specific function. So you can connect these in different combinations to manipulate and transform your data however you need. So our connector transformers that we're adding more and more of are just enabling connections to different web services and systems. So we have things like CityWorks, Azure Blob Storage, Amazon S3, for example, and we're publishing these up to our FME Hub. So they're not shipped and dependent on FME release cycles. You can go and download them off the FME Hub whenever you need them, which means because all of these are web-based quite often, if the API is changed, it means we can quickly get on top of those and people will always be able to connect to these different web services. And then obviously the automation piece, which we're going to be going through in detail today with FME Server.
Yeah, so this is really shows the breadth of our support with FME, the FME platform when it comes to data type. So you can see everything from GIS and CAD, which is definitely spatial, to XML, and that's just saying XML and JSON, which is the languages of the web, as well as very complex, some very complex data files that we work with, to BIM, to point clouds, to indoor mapping. And really, when you look at integration tools, there's no other integration tool out there that supports the number of different data types of FME. So there's, we really don't even count number of systems that we connect to anymore. It's well over 500, and with the web services, it's just exploding. So that really has that count really doesn't make much sense anymore. So if you have a web service that has a JSON API on it, then FME can connect to it and work with it, and we're happy to help you, at any point if you have any questions. So yeah, so this is really the strength of FME, bringing the power of all these data types in the spatial to the enterprise integration. So if you're, building enterprise integration solutions, you really need to think about spatial data as it is becoming more and more important. Yeah, so now we're going to look at how the FME platform supports integration patterns. So, okay, next slide, Jen.
That was easy.
Yeah, so it's FME Server automations. I think we added this 3 years ago, maybe it's 2 years ago. Time just flies by. But each release of FME, we just take it to the next level. And with FME 2020, we really added this whole notion of connecting the engine. But it's the automations, again, it's a no-code solution that really makes it easy for you to connect different applications across the enterprise.
Yeah, so this is just an example of what an automation might look like. In our demos, we are going to go and introduce this a little bit more in depth. But you can see here, absolutely no code. You sort of drag and drop, just like you would in FME Desktop, different nodes to your automation. And you can chain them together depending on the processes that you need to run them in the right order. And they always start on the left-hand side, you can see, with some kind of trigger. So the automations are always going to be watching or listening for some kind of event that then is going to run your automated process through here. Yeah. So there's no manual intervention.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say,
and you can see here a couple patterns that we put, and yeah, and all the little bubbles are workspaces. Jen mentioned those are created on the desktop environment. So yeah. And it's safe. If you want to know where we're going with automations, it's no secret. This is the book. It talks about patterns, and then we're building on how to implement these patterns in a no-code solution with FME. So I've read the book at least twice, and it's really, really, really great.
So yeah, so now we're going to get started and have a look at how we can start to build those automations, which we kind of labeled Workspace Orchestration. You're controlling the order that Workspaces flow in order to get the right outputs and processes that you need. Yep, so our first demo, I'm just going to take you through introducing automations, and we're going to build a really simple automation to get started with. But before I do that and jump into the FME Server web interface, we'll talk about the 3 components that make up FME Server automations. So we'll start with the triggers. Every automation needs to start with a trigger. So this is something that is listening for and receiving messages from quite often external clients, or this can also be from within FME Server. So relating this back to the enterprise integration patterns, if you're talking to other departments and they're interested in integrating different enterprise applications, if you're talking to other professionals that don't know about FME Server, if you start talking to them about triggers, there's a chance that they're not really going to necessarily know what you're talking about. So we can also think of these as consumers. So there's a couple of different types of consumers, either polling or event-driven consumers. So these are consuming messages. So we have examples of both of these in FME Server. So we have some polling triggers or consumers, such as email. I believe IMAP, it goes and checks an email inbox every few minutes or on a time interval that you specify. Things like directory watching, Amazon S3 bucket watching, these are all polling. And then we have some event-driven triggers or consumers as well. So these will be things like Azure Event Grid, email, SMTP, or webhook. So as soon as a message or event arrives to FME Server, it will then just start processing immediately. And then once you've placed your trigger, you obviously want something to happen based on that message coming in. So this is where you will add actions. So we have internal actions, which will be colored orange nodes in your automation. So these will be things that are running within FME Server. So most likely you'll see this will be an FME Workspace that's processing data. And we also have a logger, filter, and a merge tool. And then once the data has been processed, if you want to send that outside of FME Server, you can use an external action to send that message outside. So here you can do things like send an email, which a lot of people will commonly do to email reports or email if jobs were failing for some reason. You can also make HTTP requests, upload data to FTP sites or Amazon S3, basically anything that's pushing your messages or content outside of FME. So now we've understood those, hopefully, we'll take a look at what FME Server actually looks like. So you always access FME Server through your web browser, and then you can sort of have a look around. Today, we're just going to be focusing on automations. So we can get to that on the left menu bar panel here. And we're going to start with building our first automation. So if you're new to FME Server and you're playing with this for the first time, it does give you some hints here, learning to help you along the way. And we also have more resources in our FME community. And because every automation needs to start with a trigger, this will always get added on the canvas here for you. So to configure that, you can double click, and that will open up the sort of parameter editing window on the right-hand side. And that will allow you to choose which trigger event you want. So you can see here, I can scroll down, we support a whole bunch of different protocols here, which makes integrating your enterprise applications easier. Most enterprise applications should be able to communicate something like this, even if it's just writing a file out to a location. FME Server can then go and watch for that data and then start to process it. So today, just for our simple automation, just to show you how you can use this, we're going to start with the schedule, which is one of the more popular trigger options in FME. And then we could set this to repeat on interval. Perhaps we want this to run every day and process some data just to do some updates. So I can get this to start immediately, and then every single day this automation will run. And then I want to add a workspace here that's going to be processing our data. So we can add an action and connect those two together. And then again, just the same as with the trigger, you can double click on there and it will let you choose which action you want to do. So I'm just going to be running a workspace here and choose one of our sample workspaces. and press apply. So now every time that schedule fires, because it's connected to this workspace will then run every single day. So then I need to save my automation, give it a name, save it. And then what we can do as well is for those of you who are new to FME, you're probably wondering, like, this is a workspace, what actually does a workspace look like on the inside? So whilst you author your workflows inside FME Desktop, if you want to go and have a look to see what your workspace is doing, on FME Server, you can go in and view them. So just to give you an example of what a workspace looks like, this is just one of our sample ones. You can see the orange nodes here. These represent the readers and writers. So this is reading data or bringing in some landmarks data that we want to process. And then these green and blue nodes here, these would be the transformers. So these are actually changing and transforming the data so that we can get the output that we want at the end. So this is just doing some filtering of the landmarks data in Austin. So it's filtering out apartments, schools, shopping, airports, etc. The attribute creators are just giving those new attribute names for categories. So you can see the categories getting set depending on their test filter criteria. And we also have some styler transformers here. So because the end result is going to be written out to a KML file that you can use in Google Earth, we're just doing some styling so the apartments will look different to schools, and then doing some attribute copying here too, so that the KML name is right. So it's a really easy way in FME Server to have a look and see what your workspace is actually doing. Perhaps it's been a while since you published it and you've forgotten and you need to go and check it. So this was our first basic automation. So you can see absolutely no code. It's really easy to drag and drop and configure these nodes on your canvas. So now we'll take a look at our second demo. So this is just introducing how you can start to loop in automations. So Don will show a more advanced way to use looping in one of his demos shortly. But right now we're just going to introduce some of the things you can do with it. And one thing to take note of, you do get this warning when you enable looping in automations. So you can quite easily end up with infinite loops, which would end up tying an engine potentially on your server, or even all of them if your automation gets triggered a few times. So if we go back to our automation that we just built, if I wanted to say that every time this workspace failed, I just want it to start again. Perhaps if it's failing due to intermittent network issues, normally trying it again, you might find that that little network blip has resolved itself and the workspace will actually run successfully. So you can enable looping inside the menu bar. Looks like I've already got it enabled, but you can turn it off as well there. So you can just click on any of your output ports or that, and then just click them and drag it round. And then these will get shown by a dotted line here. So you can see where the loop is going. So now every time that Austin Apartments workspace fails, FME Server is going to loop it back round and resubmit it until it would come out of the success port and the automation could carry on downstream in the workflow. So because this might not be the smartest decision, there's a good chance in this Austin Apartments workspace it's failing because of something that I've done. Constantly retrying it like that isn't going to suddenly fix my workspace and make it work. So I've built another example, which hopefully is a more useful way of using looping. So I don't need to save that automation. So this example here, and if you are quite observant, you might notice that I don't actually have any workspaces in this automation. So you don't need to add workspace nodes to an automation if you don't need to. Obviously, given that we're in FME, there's a good chance your automation will have a workspace in. So what the scenario is here, for FME cloud instances, because they're running on cloud computers in AWS, if you're not on a subscription, you get charged on an hourly basis. So you can also schedule your instances to come on at certain times. So if there's a chance that you have sort of weekly or daily scheduled data processing that you need, you might get your instance to turn on at a certain hour of the day, run through all of the processes, and then once it's finished, you want it to shut down and pause so you're not paying for time that you're not using for data processing. So what this automation is doing is, say if I had my FME Cloud instance scheduled to turn on at 7 a.m., at some point before that hour is up, I'm just going to be checking to see whether all of my jobs have finished processing, and if they have, it's good to shut the instance down and pause it. If it isn't, I obviously don't want to pause my instance because then my jobs are going to get cut off in the middle of being run. So I can set this up as a schedule just like we did in the last demo. And then I can set this to probably turn on every day at a certain time, maybe 45 minutes after my instance has started. And then what this is doing then is I've added an external action. So this is making a HTTP request, not really outside of FME Server. I'm using the FME Server REST API to talk to this instance of FME Cloud. So what this is doing is just, you can put your URL in here. This is just checking to see whether there are any jobs in the queue. So with FME Server, how it works is when you're running workspaces, these workspaces get run on engines. So if you only have 3 engines, you can only process 3 workspaces at a time. So if you submit more workspaces to get processed, they will end up in a queue. And then as soon as an engine becomes available, it will start processing the next workspace that's in the queue. So here we're checking to see whether workspaces or jobs are in the queue. And then if they are, this is going on to a message filter. So if this is successful and the HTTP request returned a response, this is going to go to the message filter. And in here, we're just filtering out that message, which is another pattern, a message filter pattern, just to see if the queue count is 0. So if the queue count is 0, there are new jobs in the queue, and this message will pass on to our next pattern. If there are still jobs in the queue, we're just going to keep this looping here. So this is also acting as a polling consumer. So we're setting this up to constantly go and ask FME Server for its queue state, and then deciding what we do with that information here. So this section here, this is just a repeat of that pattern. So once I understood how to implement this pattern to do the polling and the filtering, I can easily replicate that further downstream. So this time the HTTP request is going to FME Server again, but this time to see if there are any jobs running. So obviously if there are jobs running, we don't want to pause our instance in the middle of those. And we're going to want to wait until there are no jobs in the queue and no jobs being ran. So you can see more looping here. So if there are jobs being currently ran, we're going to loop back and then start checking the queue again, just in case more items get added whilst this job is running. And then as soon as it passes all of our criteria and is successful, there's no jobs running, there's no jobs in the queue, then we can chain another HTTP request here, which would go to the FME Cloud API and then pause our instance. So here, whilst the looping going on is going to be sort of polling FME Server pretty frequently, what we're not doing here is, because there's no workspaces, we're not tying up our engines. So our engines stay available for processing the jobs and doing the data transformation and integrations that we need them to. Yep, so that's what we just talked about for here, with the HTTP request, doing the polling and the looping. And again, you could also add another filter to check for different HTTP responses, so doing more message filtering here before you start to loop again. Because as I mentioned with the workspace, if the request is failing because it's bad on my part, maybe I've put the wrong password in or the wrong URL, constantly retrying that isn't going to make it work. So you're probably going to want to add message filters for your looping, just to make sure that it's looping because of a non-human error, so it can try again there. So we first released automations in 2019, I believe. But very early on, we were getting feedback from people that they wanted and needed to be able to pass messages or content out of their workspaces so that they could be consumed downstream in these automated workflows. And passing those messages between different patterns is really important. So we added the automations writer, which allows people to do that. So just as you would write data out to, say, a shapefile or an Excel file in FME, you can now add an automations writer. So on the left-hand side is what it looks like in desktop. Each of those sort of like orange blocks is a feature type. So each of those feature types correspond to an output port, which will appear in your workspace in automations. So you can see, depending on inside the workspace, some state data is getting filtered depending on its size. So anything that ends up going to the large feature type inside the workspace will get passed out as a message from the large port in your automation. And then you can control which workspaces process different data depending on which port they come out of, because you might want to handle those messages differently.
Perfect. Yeah, so now we're going to take it, to the next level. Jen showed orchestration, which was automations, being able to control how your workspaces are run. And with looping, you can now take it to a level where it depends on the results from, she had a great example with the HTTP caller there, an example of how you can do that. Now we're going to look at how, by connecting the engine to the automations, we can do enterprise integration. So here we go. So the first one is, the scenario is an invoice. So we're processing an invoice that has a bunch of row items. And the idea is here is each of the row items can be processed individually. And so an invoice message, a message identifying an invoice is going to come up, and we're going to split them out by item and be able to process each item individually in parallel, because each row item is not dependent in any way on others. And this is a pattern that will happen over and over again. Invoice is just a classic one that we're all familiar with. So that's the reason we've shown this one. And so there's a number of patterns here. The first pattern that we're going to use to solve this is called the splitter pattern. And that's really simple. That's when a composite or a message that's composed of different items, in this case is their lines on an invoice, and we want to split it up to process each of those line items separately. So in this case, we have different manufacturers. As we sell, we get an invoice of many items. We'd also want to talk to the web service of the particular manufacturer and order new inventory, as well as process internally. So but anyway, the pattern is that. And the key is that these items can be processed in parallel. And the other pattern that we use here is one of the more common patterns, and this is simply the enricher pattern. And in this case, a message comes in, it could be an ID or some value, and in order to process it downstream, we need to add information to it. And this is where we use the FME Server automation writer inside a workspace to pass information in. It does a lookup, attaches information to the message, and then uses the automation writer to push it on. And so that's probably the most common pattern that people use out there. And to do this, I'm going to use this dynamic workspace capability, and you'll see it but just to sort of show you how this kind of works. Basically, what this does is on the dynamic workspace, you can see the workspace to run is specified at runtime, and the key thing is that the workspace interface must be identical for all workspaces on the input and the output, because we're using one as a template, and so but then we're able to run any workspace we want. But the criteria is, of course, the workspaces have to have the same input parameters and the same output parameters in order for the messages to be passed properly. But you'll see that in a minute. So the first automation is this one here, and you can see I'm using a directory watch. I go to a workspace called decode invoice, and the decode invoice is very simple. And here's the example of the invoice that comes in. I have a number of systems that can bring them in. So one system wants to dump me this information in CSV. So you can see there's a code, an item, a manufacturer, a price, and the number ordered. Other systems want to do it in JSON. So there it is, the same information there. And of course, everybody's favorite XML, there it is there. And so I wrote a workspace that could handle all three of those formats with FME, the desktop. So there it is there, really simple. I read the whole file in here. I don't know what it is, so I say, hey, let's see if it's valid XML. If it is, then I just fragment it. If it's not, I say, hey, let's see if it's JSON. If it is, I use the JSON fragmenter to do that. And hey, if it's not JSON, then we're going to try the CSV reader, and then we do that. So that's the first workspace. And so if we go back to the automations here, you can see that is the decode item invoice. So I've decoded the invoice. The next thing to note is that when this is run, because I have fragments, what that effectively does is for each item in the invoice, they're going to come out. So this workspace is going to write the same number of messages out that is in the invoice. The feature reader, of course, is using CSV. So again, each row in the file is going to be a separate item. The next one is I process the item. So I'll look at that here. And very simple. I'm keeping my workspace as simple because really this is more about the automations. But I process it, and then I update an orders in a Postgres, basically just I'm logging all the orders I've done for the day in my business. And now I want to use the dynamic workspace here, but first I have to get a workspace, and I don't have a workspace name. I only have a manufacturer. So again, I wrote a very simple workspace here that does the content enricher. I have a simple database joiner, which basically does a lookup of the manufacturer, joins on the manufacturer, and the field that comes out is the name of the workspace right out. So you can see the output message here has workspace on it, whereas before it didn't, and now it does. And then the dynamic workspace is really the smarts of the whole thing. So if I click here and I go to the manufacturer info, you can see now that I have the name of the workspace in here. So I simply grab that name of that workspace and pass that down, grab that, and now this effectively can run that workspace. And that's the other thing to note about this automations is that there's inherent parallelism going on without you even thinking about it. As I write out these different invoices, if I have multiple engines, I can do them in parallel. So now if I go over here to complete it, you're going to see that all those different workspaces have been run. Okay, and you can see the key of the dynamic workspace was this ability to have the workspace picked at runtime. I didn't actually have to code it all. You know, really quickly this morning, we only had an hour talking about these enterprise integration patterns, and they really do build the foundation of connecting an enterprise together. With the nice thing about FME is it's a no code option, so you do not have to write code. Obviously you have to understand the data and what the applications are passing around, but you never have to open and write code. And this is really great for a lot of reasons. One, you can show the experts who may not be coders on what's going on, and then you can have a really great discussion. Trying to get somebody who doesn't code to understand code is really difficult. Also, it's easy to, visually you can see what's going on. As spatial data becomes more and more important, it's really important that you select a tool that supports a wide range of formats and applications, including spatial data. We're seeing lots of large organizations starting to embrace spatial, new cloud-based databases and others that are starting to include spatial. And so spatial is only becoming more important to the enterprise. When you compare FME, the FME platform with other enterprise integration patterns, we truly believe that you have unmatched ROI when you start, return on investment, when you look at FME. First, spatial's included. And when we mean talk about spatial, we don't just mean lat long, we mean any kind of spatial data that you're gonna come across. You know, this enables you to save the most valuable thing that you have, and that's the valuable time of your highly skilled users or employees, your team members. And so that's really, really key. As far as future-proofed, FME, we have an annual maintenance. We also have subscriptions. And if you get that, you're all, as things change, as new data types, new types of spatial update, web services change, you're able to embrace those and you just get them. We don't charge by connectors or by formats or by systems. We recognize that you probably use a few, and so why should you pay for other ones? And also, as you use FME more and more to bring in more and more systems, you're going to need larger FME deployments, and that's the way that we believe it should work. You shouldn't be paid for the number you connect to, but you're going to buy the amount of work that you're actually being done. And so, yeah, and our support is both with our live chat and our experts at SAFE, whether you read them a live chat or through email or some other mechanism. And our community is just second to none. You're going to find a really passionate group of people who are helping, willing to help, and we really enjoy it. So, yeah. And licensing, many options. You can purchase perpetual licenses. That's our traditional for organizations that like that. Or we have subscriptions, and subscriptions are, you know, the ultimate in flexibility and easy growth path, and lots of, you know, options there too. And of course, we have the cloud deployment, which is what Jen is now overseeing from the support side, which is a hosted solution of the FME server running on AWS in, you know, various regions depending on where you are. Thanks, everybody. I think Jen's going to join us here very clear. There's Jen. Yeah. And Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the person behind the scenes that makes all this happen. And thanks so much for tuning in. Lots of great questions around what patterns we support, and you know, and things like that. We continue. That book is really the future roadmap of server. Some of the things that we're going to be doing moving forward are some of the higher level patterns, like enterprise service bus and you know, and things like that. If there's any questions you have, we always view these webinars as, you know, an initial engagement. So questions after this is over, great. Reach out to us at support.com, and we're happy to engage and learn more from you and what your data challenges are, and also how we can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll hang back for a minute or two in case any other questions come in. And like Don mentioned, definitely reach out if you have any other questions after the webinar. Yeah. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, so thanks, everybody. Yeah. So Jen, any questions you wanted? I saw someone that just came in, a quick one about RabbitMQ. Yes, there is. We do support RabbitMQ as one of the triggers. There's many different ways to get data into to FME. And if there is an environment that you want us to engage with, like, let us know. Like any piece of integration software, it's never finished, and there's always more systems that we can integrate into. So yeah. So awesome. Good. Well, thank you, everybody. It was a lot of fun. and lots of activity in this whole front coming in our new release, which is in March of this year. Yeah.
Awesome. And I've also,
oh, sorry.
Sorry, Don. I was just going to say I've also dropped a webinar code badge for redeeming in the community. I'll drop that into the chat now as a thank you for joining this morning.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah, thank you. Good. Okay, so thanks everybody. Yep. Yep.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.